Okay, so this is E698G. We are at lecture 3. So far we have seen the calculation for delay in a CMOS inverter, right? And our conclusion was that irrespective of the devices that are being used in the CMOS inverter, at the end of the day, any delay can be modeled as some capacitor that needs to be charged or discharged divided by the current that is available for charging or discharge. And once you have a CMOS inverter or any inverter for that matter, you can create a buffer, and from there you could create a delay line. Right? Then we started looking at a time to digital converter or a TDC. I had given you a specific problem to think about, right? So you are asked to measure the time interval between rising edges of two different signals. So I called those two signals as start signal and stop signal. You are required to measure the time interval between both of these. Let me call this delay as some t. Right? And let's say you want to measure this time interval with a resolution of, right, let's say 100 picosecond. I think in the previous class I had asked for 50. It doesn't matter, some given resolution. And let's say you do not want to use a very high frequency clock. Right? So the problem statement given to you was, if you had a buffer whose delay was same as the resolution that you had to measure this time interval with, is there a way to implement this TDC? Right? What does a TDC do? It is going to measure some time interval and give you a digital code that corresponds to this time interval. Right? So any answers? Okay, let me give you one idea, right? Very similar to what he has started off with, right? Let's say I take my start signal and I pass this through a buffer chain. I'm going to call these nodes as N1, N2, N3, etc., where each buffer now has a delay of 100 picosecond. Now, as you rightly pointed out, this 100 picosecond buffer itself is an assumption that is a little problematic, but we'll soon come to that. Right? But let's say I had an arrangement like this. Then if my start signal went high here, then the N1 waveform is going to go high after 100 picosecond delay. N2 will go high after another 100 picosecond. N3 is going to high after one more 100 picosecond, and N4, etc., etc. Right? Now let me put my stop edge somewhere here. So let's say my stop edge occurred here. Now at the instance at which we have a rising edge in the stop, if I observe the different phases of start, I can see that I'm going to get some sequence, right? For example, at this node, the value is 1. At this node, the value is 1. At this node, the value is 0. For N4, what do you think the value is going to be? It's going to be 0. For N5, 0, etc. Right? So now I have a sequence of 1s followed by 0s. Looking at this sequence, do you think I can make any predictions about the delay between start and stop? It is greater than? It is greater than 200 picoseconds. So this was 100 picosecond. This was another 100 picosecond. So it is greater than 200 picosecond, but lesser than 300 picoseconds. Right? So just by using the different phases of start, I'm able to predict or estimate the time interval with a resolution of 100 picosecond. Right? So now I spoke about sampling N1, N2, N3, etc. at the rising edge of stop. How do I implement that in circuit? I want to sample, again, one problem at a time. I want to sample this node N1 at the rising edge of stop. What circuit element comes to your mind? A D flip-flop, right? So then I could take a D flip-flop. The clock has to be stop. The D signal is N1. This output I will call as O1, output 1. Now I repeat this again and again. So I have another flop that is sampling N2. The output is O2. Sampling N3, output is O3, etc. So the output of the TDC is right now a sequence of bits O1, O2, O3, etc. And in this particular case, I see that that sequence corresponds to 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, etc. Right? And the number of ones in this sequence is telling you what the delay is, right? So for example, I look at the number of ones in the sequence, right? That is 2. So now I can store this information in binary format into a register. That becomes my TDC output, right? So if the TDC output is 2, that means the delay is, the T in is greater than 2 times Tres, and it could be any value which is lesser than 3 times Tres. Right? So typically we say that it is 2 times Tres with some additional uncertainty. Any questions on this? So as you can see, I started with similar looking structure as what you have drawn. No, so okay, I'll come to that. You can have an architecture that looks like this also. So any questions on this? Very simple idea, right? If I have a buffer with delay 100 picoseconds, then we are set. Now, yes.
How do we decide number of buffers that we need to use?
Yes. So the question is, how do we decide number of buffers that we need to use? Right? Before I answer that, I want to show you how you could represent the characteristics of this TDC as a plot. Right? So the output is a digital code, input is a delay. If I wanted to sketch a plot, what should I do on the x-axis? What should I do on the y-axis? So the output of the TDC is a digital code. The input to the TDC is a time interval. Right? I want to graphically represent the TDC's characteristics. What plot should I do? Time versus digital code? Or digital code versus time, right? That makes a little bit more sense given that the independent variable can be given on the x-axis, right? So then I could do a digital code versus delay for this particular TDC, right? So I'm going to give T in on the x-axis, and we are going to look at code on the y-axis, right? Now for this particular system, when your time interval was 0, let's say the start and stop occurred at the same time instant, what is the output? All zeros, right? Now let's say the time interval is 10 picosecond. What is the output? All zeros. 20 picosecond? 50 picosecond? 99 picoseconds? 100? You get one, right? So till 100 picosecond, your characteristic is here, right? From 100 picosecond to 200 picoseconds, what is the output? You get output as 1, right? So you have your plot, let's say here, right? Now from 200 to 300 picoseconds, the output is going to be 2. Now, so you sort of get a step curve like this. Okay? Now let's say you used,
The code that you are writing is like 1 and 2. How you are writing 1 and 2?
how am I writing 1 and 2? So here you get 0 ones or 1 1, 2 ones, etc.
It's the number of ones that you are indicating as
Right. It is a number of ones that you are looking at. So when you get a representation where you write something like this, and then if you're looking at either the number of ones or the number of zeros, this sort of a representation is called as a, has anyone seen this? Thermometer code. Right? So now you can take a thermometer code and convert this into binary information. Right? So wherein you could, now what is the information that you want to look at, you have to decide. So in our particular case, we are looking at the number of ones. That information alone, you can encode it into a binary number. Is that clear? Now it's possible that I have a different architecture where the information you still get a thermometer code like this, but the information you want to look at is not the number of ones, but the number of zeros. Right? So you will count the number of zeros and then represent that in binary representation. So I have directly shown the binary representation here. Is that okay? Right? So for example, let's say you had a 32-bit thermometer code, which means this is a sequence of numbers wherein the number of bits in that sequence is 32. Right? And then let's say you're looking at the number of ones in that sequence. How many bits do you need to represent this 32-bit thermometer code in binary? You need 5. Right? So so you can have a long thermometer code, but at the end of it, you can convert this into a binary representation so that you're using lesser number of bits for further processing. Okay, so now we have 2, 3, 4. Okay, now let's say I used 5 buffers in this representation. Sorry, 5 buffers for my implementation of the TDC, which means you will have N1, N2, N3, N4 and N5, right? Which means I can, after 500 picosecond, what happens? So I measure 400 pico.
Shouldn't it remain stagnant at 2?
Shouldn't it
remain stagnant at 2?
Why do you think it should remain stagnant at 2?
There are only 2 ones, right?
There are only 2 ones. So the plot we are doing is by assuming that there is some Tn, and I'm going to change this Tn from 0 to some maximum value. Right? So as I keep increasing my Tn, the digital code is also going to change. For a given Tn, you will have a particular code, but we are varying the Tn and then trying to get the characteristics of the TDC. Right? So now let's say I had up to, so this is N4 and this node is N5. Right? So up to 100 picosecond, only N1 will go high. Between 100 picosecond and 200 picosecond, only N1 will go high. Between 200 to 300 picosecond, N2 goes high. 300 to 400 picosecond, you are here. 400 to 500, you are here. Above 500, what happens? Sorry? Till 600? Huh. So after 500 picosecond, right, what happens? It just becomes a constant. It doesn't matter if your delay is 500 picosecond or 800 picosecond or 1000 picosecond, your TDC cannot differentiate that, right? So there is a maximum delay that your TDC can accurately measure. In this particular case, that is roughly around 600 picosecond, right? Because it can measure up to 600 picosecond with an uncertainty of 100 picosecond with your resolution. Now, if you wanted to have more range for your TDC, what should you do?
Increase the number of
You have to increase the number of buffers. I think that answers your question. You find out what is the range for which you need to design the TDC. From there, you can back calculate what is the number of buffers you require. Okay. Now, what happens if the delay was negative? That is, your stop is occurring before start. Does it follow the same behavior on the other side? Do you get a step on the negative side? You can discuss and answer. Your stop has occurred before the start, so that your Tn is now negative.
We can delay our stop, right?
We can delay our stop. Sorry?
Let's suppose if we have start from after 200 picoseconds,
Huh.
and after 0 0 it will start from 1.
After 0 0, it will start from 1. Okay, so the scenario I'm giving you now is that it will remain at 0, right? So your start is going high somewhere here. Your stop has gone high here, right? Now all the other phases of start that you have generated are going to appear after the rising edge in the start, right? Which means they are all 0 at the instant stop is occurring. So if you were to sample at this edge, it's simply going to sample all zeros, right? So in particular, this particular TDC cannot measure a negative delay. It will simply give you 0. So this is the characteristic that you have for the TDC. So when you are starting to design a TDC, you will get a range for which you are designing the TDC. The customer will say, please make a TDC that can measure time intervals between 0 to, let's say, 1 nanosecond. And you need to measure this with a resolution of 100 picosecond, right? So then you know what is the expected behavior. So you have this sort of behavior from 0 till 1 nanosecond. From there, you back calculate how many buffers are needed, and then you can design your TDC. Okay, any questions here? Yes.
If we have a clock, simply we can use counter also.
So that was covered in the last class, where if you have a clock, you can simply count the number of clock edges between the start and the stop, right? Now for a 100 picosecond resolution, what is the clock frequency you would require?
It will be
10 gigahertz,
That
right?
won't be possible.
Yeah, so it might be possible in some of the advanced nodes, but when you consider power consumption, the challenges of implementing a high frequency circuit, availability of a high frequency clock, etc., there are limitations to that method, right? If you wanted a low resolution, like measure time interval with a 1 nanosecond resolution or 2 nanosecond resolution, go ahead and use a clock. That is sufficient. Clock, and a counter that is counting the number of clock edges between start and stop. But when you need better resolutions, then you need to think of techniques where a high frequency clock is not required. And the implementation shown here is one such technique. Right? You don't require a high frequency clock, but you are still able to measure the time interval with a resolution of 100 picosecond. Right? So similarly, if you had a buffer whose delay was 50 picosecond, you can implement a TDC with a resolution of 50 picosecond. Now, this particular implementation of TDC is called as flash TDC. Right, analogous to the flash ADC that you see in analog to digital courses. Okay, so now I'm going to give you another variant of the circuit. You have to tell me whether this can act as a TDC, right? And if it can act as a TDC, how should I look at its output? Right? Yes.
Can we use a latch in this circuit
You want to use a latch.
so that it can also cover this negatives?
I didn't follow the latch part.
Like instead of flip flop.
And so the flip flop is now sensitive to the rising edge in stop. If you use a latch, it is now not sensitive to the rising edge. That is not problematic.
Basically, it will. Let's suppose if we have a latch.
Mhm.
In this case, it will be like 1 1, then 0, then 1. In this case, if we use a latch.
How is it 1 1? So now that you mentioned a latch, is the latch, so you're putting a latch here, right? Would you keep a latch which is transparent for the 0 value in stop or for 1 value in stop? For the 1 value, if you keep okay, so you are going to put a latch here wherein this is sensitive only to, it is transparent, so it will not sample when it is 0, it is going to hold the previous value, and when it is 1, it is going to allow the value to come here. All right, now as long as your stop signal doesn't fall down or your start signal doesn't fall down, this might be okay. Right? Do you see any other objections to that suggestion? So instead of using a flip flop where you are sensitive only to the rising edges in the stop, we could use a latch, which means for a latch it is level sensitive. If the clock is 0, the latch is now going to hold the value. If the clock is 1, the latch is going to be transparent from input to the output. Should I explain the functionality of a latch? Comfortable? Okay. So in that case, provided your start and stop signals are, but even then you have a problem, right? Because
Fluctuation in the level would cause.
I think more than the fluctuation in the level, so when this N3 goes to 1, right? So it will initially see 0, but given that your stop is 1, now the latch is transparent. So when this goes to 1, the latch output will also go to 1, which means you will only see 1 1s.
Can we count like this 1 1 0 then 1 1? So we can count the.
How do you get that 0?
By register, by like in some register.
So you want to have a flip flop after the latch. Like you want to sample it and store it, right? If you have a latch which is going to be transparent at the rise when stop is equal to 1, right? This change will then directly appear at the output, right? It will initially see 0, and when the N2 goes to 1, the O3 will also go to 1, right? Which means if you want to hold it, you need to sample it, and best way to sample it is using a flip flop. Right? But a very nice suggestion. Okay, so now let me give you another circuit. So you're free to discuss in groups and then give me an answer. So instead of using stop to sample the delayed phases of the start, now I'm going to sample the stop signal. And I will sample the stop at delayed phases of start. So the signal that is being sampled is stop, and we are using the delayed edges of the start to do this. So this is my O1. O2. O3, etc. Right? So I am giving a time interval, which is the delay between the rising edges of start and stop, and the output is O1, O2, O3, etc. So first question is, can this act as a TDC? And the second part is, if so, how should I interpret the output? And you can assume that these buffers, let's say, have a delay of 50 picosecond. So you are free to discuss in groups and then give me an answer.
This time it will be the number of zeros in this time.
Right? So everybody is convinced that this can be used as a TDC, right? And if you look at the sequence of O1 to ON, it will be the number of zeros at the start that will determine the TDC output. Okay. So again, if there is any confusion, in the same waveform, right? Instead of sampling at the stop, now you are going to be sampling the stop signal at all of these edges. So here you get 0, here you get 0, and this is going to be 1, right? So your sequence of O1, O2, O3, etc. is going to look like 0, 0, 1. Then the next edge will also sample 1, etc. So you get a sequence of zeros followed by ones, and the number of zeros is telling you what is the delay between start and stop. Let me give you another circuit. This time I generate delays of the stop, phases of the stop, and then I use the start signal to sample it. Etc., etc. So this is your O1, O2, O3, etc. Same question. Can this act as a TDC? If so, what is the output? How will you interpret the output that you get? So can I see a show of hands? How many of you say that this can act as a TDC? Okay. How many of you say that this cannot act as a TDC? Okay, others have yet not decided. So let me help you make a quick decision, right? So now you have a start signal which is going high here, and let's say your stop is going high somewhere here, and then you generate phases of the stop signal. So your N1, N2, etc. are phases of this stop, right? And you are sampling at the rising edge of start, right? What is the output sequence you get? It's all zeros, and it's all zeros irrespective of the time interval being given for measurement, right? Therefore, this cannot act as a TDC. So anytime you see a circuit, you start by sketching out the waveforms and see what the circuit is trying to capture, right? And then try and relate the result with the time interval that is being fed at the input, right? That will help you determine whether it can act as a TDC. So this cannot act as a TDC. Okay, all well and good. We have seen at least 2 variations of a flash TDC, but all of these depend on having a buffer whose delay was same as the resolution that you wanted, right? Now let us test if this assumption is actually valid. Can we get a buffer whose delay is, let's say, 100 picosecond, right? So for this, we have to understand something called as process, voltage, and temperature variation effects in a IC design, in IC, right? This is in short called as PVT, and we will start by looking at what it means to say there is a process variation, or when you talk about the chip came in a certain process corner, right? Now every time, so you guys know that we design the IC and then it is fabricated on a silicon wafer. So the silicon wafer typically has a diameter of 300 millimeter, So this is one of the common type of wafers that is used with 300 millimeter diameter. But there are other special wafers also which could have a diameter smaller than this, larger than this, etc. Right? And your design, so on this wafer you will have multiple replicas of the same IC. So basically this is divided into multiple ICs, right? The same design replicated multiple times. So this gets fabricated on the wafer, and then they will dice or basically cut this and give you the individual dice. And then you take the individual die, you package it, and it is now in a format where it can be soldered onto a PCB. So let me show you an image of a wafer. This has been picked up from the TSMC website, right? And if you look closely, you can almost identify the individual IC here, right? You can see that the same pattern has been repeated over and over again. So these are all same ICs. It gets fabricated, then they will cut the die along these lines and then give you the individual ICs which you can test separately. Okay, so now let me take one particular die in this corner. Let's say this was die number 300, right? And I look at all the NMOS transistors in that die. Right? So I took die number 300. Right? So this is some IC with so many transistors inside, but I simply look at all the NMOS transistors in this IC. Let's say there were some 10,000 NMOS transistors on this particular IC, on this particular die. Then I look at the threshold voltage of all these NMOS transistors, right? What do you expect to see? Do you expect the threshold voltages to be the same?
No.
You expect to see some variation. So if I were to plot the histogram, right, so where the threshold voltage values are plotted here and the number of times, the frequency with which a particular transistor with that threshold voltage is appearing is plotted on the y-axis, you'll see that you'll get a histogram like this. This has a mean, let's say VTH 300, just to show that this is a mean of the threshold voltages for the 300 IC. Okay. Now let's say I pick another IC from the same wafer. Let's say we picked some IC here. Let's say this was our IC number 600. I repeat the same process, which means I expect to see, again I plot a histogram of the threshold voltages of all the NMOS transistors in die number 600. What do you expect to see? So again a Gaussian curve you expect to see, but this time you'll notice that the mean has also shifted. Right? So anytime you have a Gaussian curve, you know that there will be a mean and a sigma, and you can utilize these two parameters to characterize the curve, the behavior, right? And you see that the mean between both the curves have also shifted, right? So the key idea here is that when you design ICs, you will have variation in the transistor properties from one die to another, right? The variation is higher if these dies are coming from different wafers. Variation tends to be slightly smaller if the dies are coming from the same wafer. But either way, you have a inter-die variation. This is also called as die-to-die variation, abbreviated as D2D. Now similarly, on the same die, on the same IC, when I look at the different NMOS transistors, you see that they also don't have the same VTH. There is a variation in properties there as well. And this is called as intra-die variation, or also called as within die variation. This is abbreviated as WID, right? Now as designers, this is problematic for us, right? Which means we will not be able to confidently say that the NMOS transistor has so much VTH, it has so much current, etc. Right? Now as designers, we call this inter-die variation as process variation, and the intra-die variation, which means variation of the properties of the transistor within the same die, as mismatch. Now, the reasons for all of this variation comes from the fabrication process itself. Could be difference in the doping concentration, the difference in how much is etched, how much chemical concentration was seen at a particular corner of the wafer during an etching process, etc. Right? So all the small irregularities and randomness in the fabrication process translates to either a process variation or mismatch between the transistors for us. Right? Now a quick question: would you like a Gaussian curve here with a larger standard deviation or a smaller standard deviation? Obviously a smaller standard deviation, which means your transistor properties are closer to each other, right? So if you had to pick a PDK, and if everything else is same, you would try to pick a PDK where the variation is smaller, the sigma is smaller. Okay, now one more part is, like I said, it is not possible to have all transistors within the same die to have the same properties, but it is possible to match a handful of transistors to have similar properties. We say you can match some n number of transistors. Now to do this, you need to place these transistors very close by to each other, and you typically have larger areas for these transistors, and you also make sure that they see similar environment. Right? So with these design techniques, you can have matching between small number of transistors. So this, you have to specifically design for it, but this is possible. And you will see that this is a critical idea we will use in future. Okay, so now we saw that the VTH, there is a variation. Similarly, all the other transistor properties such as mu and COX, etc. will also have variation. Now, we don't talk about these variations as individual quantities varying, but we look at its combined effect in terms of whether the transistor is a fast transistor, meaning can it switch fast, or is the transistor a slow transistor, right? It basically boils down to, if I were to use this transistor as a switch, is it going to switch fast or is it going to be a very slow switch, right? So we can say a transistor could be either a slow transistor, or it can have typical characteristics, sometimes also called as nominal characteristics, or it can be a fast transistor. Now, it's not necessary that both your NMOS and PMOS transistors have the same behavior, right? It's possible for your NMOS transistor to be slow or fast. Similarly, your PMOS transistor can also be slow or fast, right? Now, if both NMOS and PMOS are at typical corner, right, then let's say you are somewhere here. Now, your NMOS and PMOS could both be slow, then you say we have an SS corner, or it could both come at fast corner. You can also have corners where your NMOS is fast, but your PMOS is slow, and similarly, where your NMOS is slow and PMOS is fast, right? Now, if I were to sketch a very qualitative diagram like this, you can see that all of this forms the corners of this particular figure, right? Which is why we tend to call this as process corner, right? So now when you send a design for fabrication to the foundry, right, you do not have control over whether the chip is going to come in typical corner or it is going to come in SS or FF or any of the other corners, right? Now, if you are using NMOS transistor, PMOS transistor, resistors, inductors, and capacitors on your chip, it's possible that all of them can come in different corners. Your NMOS is, let's say, in slow corner, PMOS at fast corner, resistor comes in the maximum value corner, the inductor comes in the lower value corner, etc. Right? So much variation exists when you try to design an IC. The transistor properties, every device property can have a variation, right? Now, we cannot design like this, right? Can you imagine if we were to design any amplifier, for example, right? we do not have control over what corner it is going to come at. But we at least should be able to make sure our design works even in the presence of this variation. So what happens is, from the foundry, you get multiple files from them for the devices, which captures all this Gaussian behavior. Right? The current behavior, the transistor, all the transistor properties are well characterized and put in a model file. Even the statistical variations are characterized and put in the model file. So when you run your simulations, it is possible to account for these variations and then run a simulation. Right? Some of you might have heard the term Monte Carlo simulation. So in all of your previous projects, when you ran a DC simulation or a transient simulation, you assumed that your transistors are all in the same corner, it is well matched. Right? Now, if you wanted to capture this mismatch effect, then you have to run a particular simulation called as Monte Carlo simulation, where you will feed in the statistical model files. Now, if you simply wanted to verify your design across different process corners, which is at SS, FF, etc., then process corner files are also available, and then you can verify it. Right? So for regular simulations, we can do this. Now let us come back to our buffer. We started off with a buffer that had a delay of 100 picosecond. Right? So now you are designing this. Let's say at the typical corner, you made sure that the delay is 100 picosecond. What do you think will happen at the slow corner? It is going to increase. Right? Just by the terminology itself, you expect everything is going to be slow, which means the buffer is going to take longer time to charge and discharge. Right? So this is going to increase, and let's say this goes to 130 picosecond. Right? Similarly, at FF corner, you can expect to see a smaller number. Let's say this was at 75 picosecond. Now imagine this. You are running a company. You have sent out 10,000 ICs for fabrication. You got these 10,000 ICs. You are selling this to a customer. Customer asked for 100 picoseconds of resolution. And now you are telling him, here is a TDC. It is possible it will have exactly 100 picosecond, but it might vary anywhere between 75 picosecond to 130 picosecond. And this is actually a huge variation. Right? One of the common use case for TDC, among a lot of other things, is also in physics experiments. Right? So this 75 picosecond to 130 picosecond, so much uncertainty. With so much uncertainty, if somebody were to build an experimental setup, they wouldn't know if the particle took 130 picosecond to travel or 75 picosecond to travel from point A to point B. So they have all of this measurement data which they cannot make sense of. So your bad design of a TDC might result in that poor chap losing his Nobel Prize. Right? So this TDC resolution can be very, very important in a lot of applications. And somehow, once the process once we look into the process corner variations, you see that a buffer with 100 picosecond, you cannot reliably guarantee that. It can vary from one chip to the next chip. And you have no clue which chip has 100 picosecond, which chip has 130 picosecond. So much uncertainty is there. Right? Now, before we come to the solution for this, let us look at the second term I wrote earlier, which was variation because of voltage variations. Right? And we already saw this for the CMOS inverter. When we did the derivation, when your VDD increased, what happened to the delay? VDD increased, delay reduced. Right? So now let us take a minute and see how your delay line or these buffers are going to get the VDD supply. So you have these buffers which are inside a chip. Right? So now inside the chip, you have these connections. Right? These are going to be metal routings. So you will connect all of them together. Then you will bring it to the boundary of the chip. On the boundary of the chip, you will have a pad. Right? A signal pad is available there. Now you don't use the chip as a standalone. You will package it inside one of the chip packages that are available so that the die is safe. Right? For example, whenever you did labs in your BTech or some of your PAs for ESE 201, you are using an IC that is well packaged. You see a black box with pins. right? So what you typically use is a dual inline package. There are multiple packages like that available, right? So now on the package, you will have a pin. There is a connection between this package pin and the die pad, right? And this typically has a lot of inductance. And then this IC is then soldered onto a PCB. So on the PCB, you will have more routing, and finally, this will come out from a voltage regulator. Now, let's say you wanted to see a voltage of 1.8 volt here. All of these metal lines are going to have some resistance, right? And you have a current that is flowing through this whole path, which means there is going to be a I into R drop. So even if you gave 1.8 volt here, the voltage you are going to see here is likely to be lesser than 1.8 volt, let's say 1.75 volt, right? I also mentioned that this path tends to have inductance, right? And what is the sort of current that the inverters and buffers are going to draw? Is it a steady current? You draw a current whenever there is a transition at the output of the inverter, right? Which means it is trying to draw spiky currents. If you look at the current waveform here, you'll see currents like this, right? Can such spiky currents flow through the inductor? So it will flow because the inductor is also not completely ideal, but then it will try to maintain that current a little constant by changing the voltage across it. So every time you see spikes, right, you will also see spikes in the voltage here. So you might be giving a constant 1.8 volt here, spiky currents are being drawn from it, and that will result in spiky voltage at these nodes, right? So your voltage is not constant at 1.8. It is already, you have a drop because of the resistance in this path. On top of it, you are likely to see some spikes on it. And again, other non-idealities in all of these routings, which finally boils down to your inverter not seeing, or the delay line not seeing the exact VDD that you designed for, right? Of course, we try to mitigate this. We make sure the resistance in these paths is very low by keeping the width of the metal line very large, right? Now, to take care of the fact that because of the spiky currents, you can have variations in the voltage, you will add a very large capacitor here, right? So that the capacitor will try to keep the potential between this node and the ground a constant. So you do all of this, right? But it doesn't mean that you get the permission to have the delay vary by a lot for just 1% variation of the VDD, right? So you will do all of this, but you still want to make sure that your circuit can reasonably operate even if there is 5 to 10% variation in VDD, right? So coming back to our buffer, right, we already know that if this VDD changes, the buffer delay is going to change, right? And you are sensitive like crazy to VDD, right? VDD changes by 5%, you will see some equivalent amount of change in the delay also, right? You need to give some immunity to variation in the VDD to your IC, because otherwise, again, you're selling it to the customer, you're telling the customer, make sure when you measure it with a very precise multimeter and make sure that the voltage is exactly 1.8 volt. You change it to 1.79 volt, I can't guarantee the resolution being 100 picosecond, right? Some margin you should be able to say, you should be able to tell the customer, make sure that the supply voltage is nominally 1.8 volt, but not lower than 1.75 and not greater than, let's say, 1.85. Right? Typically, we stick to 10% variation at least, because the tighter you make that constraint, the tighter the design of all of this becomes. Right? So 10% is a good number that you can aim for. Again, our buffer is going to fail in this particular case. You can have a constant 100 picosecond the moment you say, I need to make sure the circuit works for a small range of VDD. Okay. Now the final thing is temperature. So your delay is, we know, a function of transistor properties such as mobility, VTH, etc. And all of these are going to vary with temperature. Now imagine the situation just in Kanpur. right? Here in winter, the lowest temperature it can go to is 4 degrees Celsius. What is the highest you have seen in summers? 48, right? 45 to 48. Now, even in Kanpur, so you take the same die, right? No, forget about variation between the dies. You take one single die. In Kanpur, from summer to winter, its resolution is going to change. Right? So, effectively, in the presence of PVT, you cannot have a buffer with a constant delay of 100 picosecond using the regular designs that you do. So, are you convinced? So now we have a problem again. If we had a buffer with 100 picosecond delay, we know how to build a TDC, right? But we don't have a buffer with 100 picosecond delay. We have to now figure out a way to achieve this, right? Typically, when we want to match something to a particular quantity, what do? You compare. You take an ideal quantity that can give you this value and then you'll compare. So now we want a buffer with 100 picosecond delay. We are looking at a time quantity, right? How can you get a reference time quantity? If it's a reference voltage, I'll talk about directly reference voltage. I can give a DC voltage, wherein I generate that voltage using some mechanism from VDD, right? Now I need a time as a reference. How can I feed in time as a reference to an IC? A clock, right? So if I wanted 100 picosecond time measurement, what is the clock that I need to feed in? Again, 10 gigahertz. We are back to square one, right? Is there a solution here? Earlier, I said that it is possible to match a couple of transistors, right? Given that it is possible to match few devices on an IC, can you come up with a solution where I don't need to use a high frequency clock? Discuss and answer, right? You can feel free to discuss and answer. Feedback is, so right now we are talking about a reference, right? How will you use feedback to allow for a lower frequency clock? Discuss and then give me an answer. Question is clear, right? I want to get a 100 picosecond delay buffer, but I don't want to use a time reference wherein a clock that has a 100 picosecond time period. I want to use a clock with a larger time period, but still be able to generate 100 picosecond delay.
We can take difference between clock and the decay version.
But how will you delay the clock? What sort of digital operation?
The synchronous counter can do
Sorry?
a synchronous counter can do frequency divided
Asynchronous counter can give you a
frequency divided.
frequency divided clock. So, but you still need a high frequency clock to generate a low frequency clock. Right? The output is low frequency. So let's say instead of taking one buffer and trying to match it to 100 picosecond, I take 10 of these buffers. Right? Or maybe I'll generalize and I say I take n buffers like this. Right? And I make sure all the transistors are well matched in these buffers and these 10 buffers are identical. Right? Then I could make sure overall the delay of this delay chain or overall the delay of these buffer chain is some T clock. Right? If so, what is the delay of 1? This is T clock by n. Right? Now I can still have a large T clock and obtain a small delay for the buffer by tuning n. Right? So I could use a 1 nanosecond clock, put 10 buffers and make sure the delay over the 10 buffers is 1 nanosecond. Right? Then the delay of each buffer is 1 nanosecond by 10, that gives you 100 picosecond. Right? So again, so I have found out a way wherein I could introduce a reference time into the system in the form of a clock period, and even when the resolution required is very high, like 100 picosecond, my time reference, which is going as input to the system, can have a lower frequency. I'm able to achieve a 100 picosecond resolution with a reference input being 1 nanosecond. Okay, so I have a reference input, I have figured out a way to compare, right? Now I still need to make sure the buffer so instead of making sure individual buffer delay is 100 picosecond, I still need to make sure that the overall delay chain has a delay of t clock, right? So take a minute, discuss and see if you're able to come up with a method. So a hint is you can use negative feedback. Yeah. So our aim is finally to be able to get a buffer whose delay is some 100 picosecond. Right? Which means I need to have some reference time with which I can compare it, and that reference time we said can be t clock. But if I directly try to compare this and make this into 100 picosecond, that means I need to use my reference time period, which is t clock, to be same as 100 picosecond. That again requires a high frequency clock into the system. So instead of making sure that the delay of one buffer is 100 picosecond, I am okay in comparing the delay of a chain. Right? Now, if I am okay with working with, let's say, 10 buffers, having a 1 nanosecond delay, that corresponds to one buffer having a 100 picosecond delay. So now just for the comparison purpose, I can use the reference clock which is input to the system to be 1 nanosecond. This is clear? So now I have a 1 nanosecond reference into the system. I know that I need to take a delay chain and make sure that it has a 1 nanosecond period by comparing this to this reference. How do I do that?
But how can we ensure that all these will have the same delay?
So that basically boils down to making sure that all of these are identical, right? And like I mentioned earlier, while it's not possible to match all transistors together, you can match few transistors to have similar properties, right? So you'll make sure that the NMOS transistors here, all of them are matched well. Similarly, the PMOS transistors are also matched well. Now, how you do this is, typically all of your mismatch statistics, the standard deviation for it, it's inversely proportional to area. So you increase the W and L of the transistor so that the area is higher, so that the deviation in characteristic from one device to the next comes down. That is part one. Part two, you make sure they see identical layouts. So if you had one NMOS transistor, let's say from the first buffer, and it saw a metal line going like this, when you're laying down this transistor, even for this, even if there was no necessity to have a metal line here, you'll put a dummy metal line so that it sees identical environment on all four sides. Right? And then you will also place these as close as possible to each other. You cannot put one buffer at this corner of the IC and let's say another inverter in this corner of the IC and then expect that they will have same behavior. Right? You have to place them as close as possible. And after you do all of this, you will have the provision to simulate and see how much is a mismatch you get at the end. So you can look for the mismatch and you make sure any mismatch. So any mismatch between these is now going to introduce an error in your TDC measurement. You make sure that error is much, much smaller than the resolution of the TDC. So I can quickly comment on this. So we plotted a TDC behavior like this, right? And in the presence of mismatch, what will happen is this could shift slightly to this side. This curve might go here, etc. So you have this error at the instant at which the code is jumping from one value to the other. Right? And if you make sure that error, so let me call this as some error delta. If you make sure that this delta is much, much smaller than the resolution of the TDC, for most applications it is okay. In fact, when the consumer or the customer will give you how much error you can have here, right? And you make sure, because at the end of the day, the customer doesn't know what is the time interval that has gone in. We are providing the TDC so that he can know what the time interval is. So anytime he gets a reading, there is an uncertainty associated with that reading. So if he gets a value such as 5, right, we expect it to be 5 times t res, but ideally, if you have to be really technical, this is going to be 5 times t res plus or minus some delta, right, where we expect this delta to go as high as t res, right? In the presence of all of these mismatches, in the presence of these errors, etc., this can become a value that is larger than t res. So you can ask the customer to clearly give a specification as to how much uncertainty is okay, right? And yeah, okay, so we are back to this. So for now, assume that you are able to match it well, and this is not a concern. Now, under these conditions, you still need to be able to ensure the overall delay is t clock, right? I have given you a reference quantity. I am giving you a clock whose time period is t clock, the full range that you require, right? Now, you have a quantity against which you can compare. You can generate that quantity in your chip. How will you tune such that this delay line now has a period of t clock? What will you do? When you have a problem like this, what is the first solution that comes to your mind? Right? Any problem in analog circuits, the first thing that comes to your mind is negative feedback. So that is a hint. Do you think you can use negative feedback to stabilize the delay of this buffer chain to a clock period? Discuss and see if you are able to come up with something. So I can give you a clue. One, your delay chain now cannot be a regular delay chain, right? You want to make sure the delay between this is t clock, and I mentioned that you can use negative feedback, which means you need to tweak the delay based on some error information, right? So you can think about this delay chain as being a programmable delay line. So there is some quantity here which if you tweak, the delay is also varying. Okay? So you are looking at a programmable delay line. Sorry? So this quantity could be voltage, it could be current, etc. Now, because most likely you are going to see that there are a lot of delay lines where this programmability is coming by tweaking a voltage here. So I'll call this as a control voltage. You change this control voltage, the delay of this buffer chain is going to vary. Now, if you are using a control voltage to vary the delay, then it becomes a voltage controlled delay line. Right? So then this becomes a voltage controlled delay line. Right? So you have this voltage controlled delay line. You have a reference clock which has a t clock delay. Right? Now this delay line has some TD. You want to make sure that this TD becomes equal to t clock. Right? So analog circuits, what is the first thing that you do when you want to compare both? You will find out the difference between the two. You estimate the error, then you will do some processing, and based on that you will go and tweak this voltage. Right? So that is what we'll implement for this delay line also. We'll see how this is done. We have time. Yeah, we have 5 more minutes. Okay, so now we'll see how this is done. Right? So let's say I'm going to call this as the input to the delay line, and let's say this is the output of the delay line. So I'm going to sketch the input here. Let's say this is some output. So this is the edge 1 that was entering the delay line. This is where the edge has come out. This is your rising edge 2. This is where that edge has come out. Now let's say the delay between these two is some delta 1. Right? I am also going to mark the delay between this rising edge and this edge. Right? I can mark it as another delta in time domain. For now, I am going to show this as some delta phi. Right? So delta phi is a phase quantity. Right? But now you know how to convert between phase and time. So I hope this is okay. Now, what is our aim finally? If the delay line needs to have a delay of t clock, what should be the value of delta 1? Delta 1 has to tend to, delta 1 must tend to t clock. Right? What should happen to delta phi? Delta phi has to be 0. Right? Can you see that? So this is our aim now. Right? We want to either make delta 1 to t clock, or I can make delta phi to 0. And if I had done that, then the ideal out waveform will now look like this. Right? Where the first edge is occurring here. Is that clear? Now, I have made sure that the delta phi is 0. That means when an output edge occurs here, at the same instant, you will see the next input edge occurring at this point. Is that okay? Okay. So now, instead of measuring delta 1, I can measure delta phi also, no harm. Right? Instead of making delta 1 to t clock, I measure delta phi and then I make this to 0. Right? So I could do this. I take this input waveform. I take the output waveform. And then I have to detect delta phi. Right? I detect delta phi and then I do some sort of processing over it. And based on that, I go and change this control node voltage. Right? So I detect delta phi. I determine in which direction I need to change Vc so that the delay is going to change in the right direction. Right? And I determine that and I apply that Vc here. I again detect delta phi, do the processing and push Vc in the appropriate direction. Okay. Now let me give you a sample waveform for this voltage controlled delay line. So this is a voltage controlled delay line. If I have to look at the characteristic, what plot should I look at? Delay versus voltage, right? So let's say I give you a rough delay versus voltage plot for you. Right? Let's say it has a shape like this. Okay. Now let's say your t clock is here. Right? Which means corresponding to that, I need to apply some Vc naught. Right? Now let's say when we started off, your Vc naught was equal to 0. Right? When you powered on the chip, Vc naught was equal to 0. Which means the delay of the VCDL is going to be some value which is smaller than t clock. Right? That means you are seeing a situation like this. The delay is some value which is smaller than one full clock period. Right? Which means once you first detect the delta phi, you do some processing and should I increase or decrease the Vc? I increase the Vc. Right? So I keep increasing the Vc. Every cycle I'll detect the delta phi. I'll keep increasing the Vc till I hit this point. Right? At this point, because the delay is now t clock, what is the delta phi you will measure? Delta phi you measure is 0 and that is a steady state. So it detects delta phi to be 0 and doesn't make any other change to the circuit. So overall negative feedback is clear. Now I have a control node voltage and I need to store this voltage somewhere. Anytime you hear about storing the voltage, what is the one port 2-pin element that you can think of? A capacitor, right? Very easy element. So which means I need to have a capacitor here. And this capacitor is going to store the voltage, right? Now we talked about the necessity of changing this voltage, right? If you started off with VC value being smaller than the required VC voltage, you need to keep increasing the VC, right? Which means you need to charge the capacitor. How do you charge the capacitor? By dumping charge into it, right? That's all. Similarly, if you started off with a larger VC value, then to come here, you need to discharge the capacitor. So now this particular element should be able to either push or pull charges out of the capacitor, right? Right? So you detect the delta phi. Based on the value of the delta phi and its polarity, you push or pull charges out of this capacitor. That will set your VC. And as this negative feedback loop keeps tuning, eventually it will reach a steady state where under the steady state, the delay between these two is going to be equal to t clock. Right? And if these two have a delay of t clock, that means this delay line also has a delay of t clock. Right? So before I get into the exact terms for these elements, you can take a couple of minutes and see if you have any confusion on this overall negative feedback loop. So we can end the class here. If you have any questions, I can take it. We'll continue with this particular negative feedback loop from the next class.
The starting